Dean, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was loving that speech so much about me that I sit down and enjoy it. My entitlement to be here really is nil in one way, but in several, it's because of Wood Quay that I'm here. I had the privilege of excavating Wood Quay and of enjoying the great friendships we had with the churches, the cathedral authorities here over the years. And I think the cathedral authorities, and you mentioned it in your speech, going back to St. Lawrence O'Toole, but you know, Christianity in Dublin begins with the Vikings, no less. In 1028, the King of Dublin, the great King of Dublin, Sitrick, who was actually born a Christian, he went on a pilgrimage to Rome by arrangement with the German Emperor Conrad, who let him and his entourage down through the German Empire to Rome and back. On their way back, this is all documented by scholars other than me, and they say, they stopped in Cologne. There was an Irish Benedictine foundation in Cologne, and they got some relics there, or it was arranged that the saintly prior of that foundation in Cologne should be involved in the establishment of a church building which would have been of wood and started about 1028 or so. It would have been the precursor of this very, very historic cathedral in stone, but its predecessor for the first century and a half might have been wood. And in fact, more than that, if I may, it is very likely, thanks to the work of metalwork, early medieval metalwork scholars, that many of the great Christian treasures that are in the National Museum, like the Sushkil Malasha, like the Koch, that these various beautiful world-class containers, sacred containers of sacred scripts, that they were made here in Dublin by the Vikings. The Vikings is a great term, but it has no meaning in the 11th century. And by then, Dublin was inhabited by the Dubs, early form of the Dubliners. They were by then Christian. They had the most wonderful metalworking workshops around these precincts here. And in this area, we have the actual evidence, the physical evidence for the tools, for the trial pieces, for metal panels, etc. in my colleague Brendan O'Riordan's. And I'd like to salute his memory. He has passed, but he started the game, I finished it around here. He was a terrific pioneering scholar, an archaeologist. And he was also my predecessor as director of the National Museum. He was also a Galway man, nothing wrong with that. But better than that, of course, he had Limerick roots, and he won't be that at all. But Brendan established, and Françoise Henri, before she died, she was the great, she's a French woman, she was the professor of medieval art in University College Dublin. She saw a few of the panels that Brendan and his team dug up, and she knew from those, no better woman, that they were panels which would have been used in the production of sacred objects like the Koch of St. Columcille. So I'm trying to change your minds and think of the Dubliners in the 11th century as Christian, as men producing sacred metalwork. So good, on top of that, was their wood carving that Jim Lang, my dear old friend from York, he established that there existed in the 11th century a very specialized school of woodworking and carving and decoration in one of the Scandinavian styles, mostly the Norwegian style, called ringerike. Now you get that in church doors surviving in Norway. It's a Norwegian place name, ringerike. So some of the other ones that are also called after Norwegian place names, but they did get a great flourish in Ireland. And so good was this wood carving school in Dublin. We found the wooden objects in Wood Quay. So good were they that Jim Lang, and so distinctive, called them, it's the Dublin style, and now it's known and established. These are all the byproducts, the results of the National Museum's excavations in Dublin, and they're often overlooked. I did a book some years ago. It was, I suppose, a very ambitious attempt to kind of bring everything that we found in and place it in a broader British, Irish, Western European, Scandinavian context. I'm now revisiting that book to make it more accessible for the ordinary, what is an ordinary reader, but the educated reader who will be able to look at the various levels, enjoy the sense of discovery of the various layers in Wood Quay. Now, Wood Quay is also, of course, controversial. Much of it was, or some of it was, destroyed through the ignorance of Dublin Corporation. Let's not pull punches on this. And the connivance of the museum, which allowed them to do it. There was nobody to stand up at the time and just say, blow the whistle and say, some of this is wrong. Give the archaeologists a chance to unearth what's in the ground here, and you'll be surprised it will repay you, both scholastically, intellectually, but also in terms of an investment in tourism, which we were later able to reap with the Viking adventure, thanks again to the church, who allowed us to be involved with that. The connivance of the museum cannot be understated either. The museum was a state institution going along, giving bad advice to the powers that be. The powers that be were only delighted to get bad advice because they could consign parts of their site to the bulldozer, very small parts. But let me tell you what we have found, and I don't want to take too much time here because I know you're a meeting about families and all that kind of Gaelic, aristocratic world, and I'll finish on something about that. But I just wanted to say, what are the main results in European archaeological terms of the excavations that we did around here? Firstly, we found the embankments, the defensive walls which were earthed around the town of Dublin from the 900s onwards. This was the first walls of Dublin were earthed with a palisade on top. We found those, we found the sequence of those. Altogether we found about 10 encroachments from the land into the water. The Liffey was a totally different thing in the 900s, 1000s from what it is now. It was very wide, it was tidal, it was fast flowing. And in fact, its name in Ireland, in Irish, suggests a hurry, a danger, a menace. It was called Ruartach. It was a very fast flowing river. But stage one, the encroachment, the defensive embankments. The big threat to the Vikings wasn't from the landward side. I'm using the word Viking up to the year 1000. After that, we call it Hibernian Norse, and it's a very Christian place, as I've tried to indicate. But this first defence was replaced by another earthen thing. I have documented all that and will do so in summary in my new effort. The third stage was the stone wall, which you can see preserved in the city hall there, or whatever they call it. Then, my first introduction to real archaeology and to running a huge urban site, and I had great help, support from my colleagues in London on this advice. We found the wooden dockside of the Normans in Dublin, which was a tremendous thing. Really, to this day, and sometimes allow my Viking kind of emphasis, which is, academically more rewarding, I suppose. But I love the Norman dockside, because the Norman dockside and the ship's planks, the huge ships of that era, which were investigated by a dear old colleague who died a year ago, Sean McGrail. Sean McGrail was a ship archaeologist in Greenwich. And those were the joyful days in Wood Quay, 1975. Next year, by the way, is the 50th anniversary of the commencement of the excavations. And that's sure I haven't changed a bit, I'm still the same. But that wooden dockside and its progression into the bed of the river, that was very exciting archaeology for me, because what did we find out about the Normans, men of Bristol? What did we find out about them? They used local carpenters. I was able to work out the carpentry joints. I actually took on a fellow to help me on that site, who was my father's his father was my father's best friend down in Limerick. He was a carpenter. He had done a degree in archaeology or in engineering, but he taught me all the names of all the joinery and everything, scarf joints, all that kind of stuff, to describe and write down photographs. There's 18,000 photographs in that archive in the museum. So it's the docksides. And then we found, in returning to the Viking Age, from 900 to about 1050, we have the best urban evidence in Europe for that period, from that site. These are 12 or 13 contiguous sites, neighbour, right alongside neighbour, and there's no doubt at all about it. The Scandinavians introduced urbanism, real urbanism to Ireland, no question. Now, they may have been influenced hugely by the Saxons across the way, places like Chester. They may have seen some things there, but they were the first people who divided space into ownership, plots of ground that were owned. Now, within each of those plots were the remains of the buildings, and we found about 14 or 15, a succession of buildings, one on top of the other. Now, they weren't full buildings, they were just the foundations of basket work, basketry woven around a door. The Type 1 house, which was later the subject of my postgraduate work, the Type 1 house is from here to the two girls at the door. That's the length of the house, the biggest of the houses. There was an entrance at the end, at both ends. There was raised beds along the sides. That was your type of fire in the middle. No chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof, full lace, as we call it in Irish. So that's your classic rectangular building. And the big question is, was the rectangular building introduced into Ireland by the Scandinavians? I suspect it was. It certainly was propelled by them. The Irish tended to build in the round before that, in the ring forts, the big ring forts. You see them reconstructed at places like Craigenore. They are round fortresses with circular buildings inside. Anyway, it was the foundation, it was all that evidence for buildings, there was 5 different types of building in Viking Dublin. We were able to work out that in the excavations. We got a view of the Vikings that no one ever had before. We found out what they ate. We have all their animal bones remains. We found out their crafts. We found out some evidence of bad temper. Sometimes when they'd smash a thing off the ground, and number one leaden object was. We also found out sophistication, that they had a weight system on little weighing scales for weighing silver. And that turned into the foundation in Dublin in the 990s of the first coinage in Ireland, the Viking in Dublin. And the name of the king of Dublin, that same great king, Sitric, who became the first official Christian king of Dublin, and who died, by the way, on pilgrimage in Iona. He's buried in Iona. So he is really part of the Irish Christian scene, but he's not fully, because he's a cussed old Scandinavian. His loyalty in a way, and some of the influences, we can see it in the art And on the site, some of the influences are actually from with England. King Canute, the great King Canute, the Dane who ruled in England. King Canute had a big say in Christian Dublin, and the first 4 bishops of Dublin were consecrated not in Armagh or not in Kildare, which was the kind of diocese or the provincial headquarters of the church. No, they were consecrated in Canterbury. So Dublin remains slightly different, slightly apart for, I'd say, about 50 or 60 years of its official take of Christianity. Anyway, we are in a holy place, and still very much a holy place, but we have 1,000 years of Christian history, which is engaging, and it ties in to the Viking town and its population. I just wanted to finish by acknowledging your own work as a group. I never heard of you very much, but obviously Garrett Kelly kept me on my toes there with those official letters, and I am now very much aware of the group. And I got my sister, who has all the time in the world. Everyone's sister has all the time in the world. And she, we all have 16 great grandparents, 16. Now I've only been able to track 11, but she even found one yesterday for me. A marriage in Kilconnell around, what you know from the hunting country. It's about 1030 or sorry, 1830 or thereabouts. So we can push back, with great grandparents. And looking through the baptismal records, the marriage records, what she and I have concluded is people kept up old friendships. I remember my father saying to me in Limerick one day, they'd be 5th cousins of ours when he saw someone across the road. That was no trouble to men of that generation, to know who everyone was, where they belonged. And that was the way throughout the centuries in Ireland. And in fact, that's the way, of course, that's gone completely. In Dublin, it doesn't exist at all. You can't meet anybody who knows anyone beyond their grandmother's time. It's very rare. But to find out of the 11 names of the 16, 8 are of indigenous families and with typical Limerick names. I won't give them to you here, but the 3 are what you might call invasive, like my own name, Wallace, which is probably English, with hopefully pre-Cromwell. I think very much pre-Cromwell, and one of my ancestral families was another one of the 3 non-indigenous names, Green, which is a Limerick Clare kind of name, and one of them was hanged, I'm happy to say, in Rathkeil in 1836 for stealing guns. Anyway, I think family history is a joy and is of actual relevance. If you want to know who you are, you have to delve a bit, and don't be afraid of what you'll find out. Not everybody's ancestors, very much in my case, are nobility, but yet we were able to cooperate very much, and I'd like to mention him here, with our local landlord, Maurice Hewson, a very devout Anglican, who I had the privilege of working for, and working with. He had been in the British service in Africa, and he came home to inherit the estate, Castle Hewson in County Limerick, where his family had been since the 17th century, I would think. But he was a lovely old fellow, but he was treacherous to work at hay with, because he's hay fork, he would thrust it like a spear, and if you weren't dexterous enough on top of a cock of hay, you'd get the full brunt of it. But he was a lovely, humble man, and I'm privileged. I know he played a part in the church, and I'm privileged to mention his name. God rest him. He died tragically at home in County Limerick. So, Shin and Scale, I'm thankful for your attention. and I'm honoured to have been invited, Gerald, and I wish your group every success as we say, schlucht, schlachte, hit